is that at every step it is deeply coercive. Um, yeah. Anyway, let's do a little bit of a musical interlude, hey? Let's see what Laufey's been up to. Not a lot recently. Okay.
Some decorations bought at Tiffany's. I really do believe in you. Let's see if you believe in me. Santa baby, forgot to mention one little thing. A ring. I told Queen on the phone, Santa baby, so hurry down the chimney tonight. Santa baby, hurry, hurry, my Santa baby,
Come on. It's a story as old as time, isn't it? There are some things that Santa can do for a girl, and there are some things that Santa cannot. That's all the story we have for you tonight. Merry Christmas, baby.
I love Bill Murray. He's good value. If you're not familiar with Lety, here's their link tree. Oh God, no! How Oh, make it not. No, no, don't want that. Unpin now. No. Unpin this message. Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. Bad Gemma. Should have checked that URL before pasting it. Ah, fuck. Done it again. Hey. Let's actually go to the link minus all the YouTube bullshit. And then we can just paste in the important bit. Bloody hell. So they do a lot of jazz standards, reworked in a sort of more modern style, a lot of orchestral and jazz swing band sort of stuff. But they also do some kind of nice arrangements as well, cool stuff. Do. Let's have a look at what Mia's been up to. Nothing recent, okay. But given that it's Trans Awareness Week, how about...
Hi everyone, it's been a time. So before we start today, I want to say that I'm gonna mention children in this video or semi-annual therapy session. The video is not for children, so if you are children, go and watch Cocomelon or whatever the f you people watch. Specifically, I'm going to talk about trans people and children, the two most annoying demographics to talk about. Let's start with some trans children's stories, shall we? When I, a trans person, was 11 years old, my class did a drag race thing. The way it worked was every class at the end of a week would have a sort of get together or a party or an event or like a talent show or something to celebrate the fact that we went to school that week. I guess. I don't know how to corral kids, maybe this is the best strategy. And one week, my class decided to do a drag show. All the girls would bring clothing to the school and all the boys would dress up and wear it. And, you know, we'd parade around a little bit and laugh at each other. Like kids do. It's fun shit. I don't even know how we knew what a drag show was. I don't even know why we wanted to have a drag show. This was like way before RuPaul's Drag Race. I think maybe it was a thing on like Swedish TV at the time. Maybe RuPaul was my math teacher or some shit. I don't know. One of my close friends at the time brings a lime-colored green skirt for me specifically. And as I wear it, I feel weird gender. There was a lot of gender going on in that classroom. And this was the first time that rural, redneck, 11-year-old boy me ever got the chance to play around with gender and gender expression and do some cross-dressing. How on earth we managed to do this in a public school is beyond me. Now, I always knew that I was a bit different, but this was the first time that I ever got to fully immerse myself in those emotions. I actually asked my friend at the time if I could keep the skirt, because I was curious about these new emotions that I was feeling. And she said, "You're joking, right?" To which I had to be like, yeah.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get it.
I had no idea how to interpret these emotions or how to deal with the fact that this skirt somehow made those emotions stronger than ever before. I didn't know about gay people and definitely not about trans people. I come from a village that's pretty rural, that has like 800 people living in it with no stores and one church, and it's a pretty conservative area. No one there was openly gay when I was growing up, and definitely no trans people. This was a time when my only perception of transness at all were of people who dressed up as, you know, men in dresses on TV, or when they were the subject of jokes by the likes of Jon Stewart.
I would nominate any gay to the Supreme Court, or lesbian or bisexual or transgendered person to the Supreme Court.
Yes, yes. All rise for the Honorable Justice Chick with Dick.
Oh dear. Apologies for that, folks. Didn't know Jon Stewart had that one in his repertoire, but disappointing. So for me, my background was very similar to Mia's rather. Country towns, blah blah blah. Except for me, it was the 1970s, and there were no drag activities, and I was mostly in Catholic schools. Add a 0 for the number of people in the town, though. First place I lived was about 4,500. The other one was 8 and a bit. Still. And both had shops, right? They were towns, they weren't villages. But let's go to that's not on the screen anymore.
Killers. That Jon Stewart sketch is actually the first time that I hear the word trans person.
Transgendered person.
And growing up, I had dial-up internet, so I wasn't really could go on the internet and search for trannies. Not yet anyway. And this was way before the concept of smartphones too, so if I did use the internet to look up trannies, my parents would figure it out because I would have to use the family computer. Fuck, I'm old. So jokes like
Chick with Dick
are the only experience that I had of transness generally, and it was the only language that I knew to describe that kind of thing. And obviously, that didn't really map onto what I was feeling. I wasn't like one of those, after all. And I get why. Public perceptions around transness were basically non-existent until Laverne Cox came out as trans and gave the world knowledge like a modern-day transsexual Prometheus. Mocking jokes was the way you would refer to trans people back then. So I didn't actually end up having any language to describe these emotions until I was 18 years old and browsing 4chan, of all places, and I stumbled onto a random trans woman's transitioning timeline. A timeline that for the first time showed me that a person could transition and just look like a normal person. And then, I got it. You can do that? What the fuck? When I found this out, I had to undergo all stages of grief immediately, and then eventually order some sketchy hormones from some Greek internet pharmacy that for some reason would prescribe it to me. I am loyal forever to the nation of Greece! So that I could self-medicate, because otherwise I would have to wait 2 years in order to get my state-sanctioned hormones by the Swedish government. And fuck that noise. Had I, as a child, had the language to understand what was happening, had the tools available to me so that I could transition or at least understand my own gender, I would have transitioned way earlier. I would have tried to transition as a preteen at that point. The only thing that kept me from doing it was ignorance. And when I found out that I could do it, I tried my hardest to make up for lost time. And this story of figuring out your own transness isn't that unique. I know this is my biannual therapy session, so, you know, I'm coming with more emotional shit later on, but like this is not the sob story yet. But it's not an uncommon story from people who transition as adults. They kind of know what they're going through a little bit, they have some vague emotions, and then when they find out what they can do, that's when they try to do it. And it's a story that's especially common among people who, you know, figured out their transness before trans people were publicly known about. Today everyone is talking about trans people, but back then you didn't really have that. So for a lot of people, you only found out when you were an adult. But you'd think that today things would be easier, right? Awareness of trans people has grown to a level that I don't think has ever existed before in human history, which is exactly what people wanted for a very long time, talking about trans awareness. We have a whole day for it even. But awareness is a double-edged sword. And some people are very aware of trans people. And it's not getting easier these days, it's getting harder. And some people have lost their goddamn minds.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
It's like we have mutants living among us on planet Earth.
Is this something that you like?
All right. So, if you don't know about the current onslaught to legislate trans people out of public spaces, I envy you. If you're trans, however, odds are you haven't been able to escape the current onslaught of conservatives trying to outlaw trans people from public spaces. Anti-trans activists are trying to get laws passed in all of these US states, with these states actually having laws that have passed, and the UK is drowning under so much transphobia that the question about whether or not a woman can have a penis is somehow a major question for political leaders.
That 99% of women, I quote, of course haven't got a penis, he said.
There's a war in Europe right now, and we're focusing on like chick dick inspectors. And I could spend a lot of time going through all of these proposals and laws and legislations and explain to you why they're trying to get them passed and what the impact would actually be to trans people. But I'm not going to do that, partially because that would take up the entirety of this video, and also because it doesn't actually answer the question of what the fuck is going on. And because even if I did that with the most well-reasoned arguments in the world, I wouldn't actually be able to convince anyone of anything. Because these laws ostensibly deal with safety issues occasionally, women's sports, bathrooms, gender-affirming care to minors, but most of them have actually nothing to do with protecting children or women or women's sports. What about something else? So, what the fuck is going on? Let's deal with the issue about whether or not it's actually getting worse or not. When these laws are getting proposed, a lot of people will point out that they're just being proposed. A lot of them don't actually stand up to public scrutiny, some of them won't survive in court, and some of them just are straight up unconstitutional, meaning that they might sound scary, but they're not actually doing anything. To which I say, yeah, no doy. But it's not really about whether or not these laws get passed or not. Some of them are, and that's important, but most of them aren't. But it doesn't really matter for their end goal. Similarly to how conservative areas managed to make it really difficult to have access to an abortion even when that was a constitutionally guaranteed right, they can just make it really difficult for anyone to have access to either gender-affirming care or make it difficult to be a trans person in a public space. They don't necessarily have to make it legal. They can just make it really difficult. But politicians have this weird habit of making things legal. Take, for example, the statement by an attorney general of all people declaring that gender-affirming care should not be available to people who have other mental health conditions. Conditions like anxiety and depression. And gee, I don't know why a trans person might have depression while not being allowed to transition. Gee golly, what a mystery. Or in the UK, where a court decision claimed that puberty blockers should not be administered to children because it's dangerous, leading to puberty blockers being restricted not only in the UK, but also here in Sweden, a completely different country, despite that court decision eventually being overturned. But it doesn't really matter, because the effect has already happened. Trans people now have a harder time accessing medications like these. I also don't know why Sweden is listening to what's happening in a court of another country, but I guess that's just what Sweden does now. So even if these things aren't legal, they still make it a nightmare to actually navigate a trans healthcare system in any given state. Or how restrictions of drag and public performances might make it difficult for trans people to even be entertainers in any public space, because it leads to an atmosphere of fear among private individuals and doctors who might be afraid to host trans-themed events or administer gender-affirming healthcare. Conservatives don't really care about making a solidly workable legal system that applies equally and well-regulated to everyone. Their goal with this anti-trans legislation is to get rid of trans people. So even if it's a haywire system that barely works and is contradictory and hypocritical unto itself, does not matter, because the goal will still be achieved, and that's the only thing that matters. If they get rid of trans people, they've won. And it doesn't matter if they do it in one unified law or if they do it in 100 different statements by attorney generals that will be fought in courts over decades of years. But as I've mentioned, some laws have actually passed, and they're pretty damn draconian. Take for example SB 150, which recently passed in the House in Kentucky, which not only bans gender-affirming care for new and existing patients, forcing many to detransition, but also bans any mention of sexual orientation or gender identity in classrooms, while also forcing schools to out trans children to their parents if they find out about the student hiding a trans identity.
Yeah, sadly, and this is this content is over a year old, so yeah, you can only imagine how much worse it's getting and how much worse it's going to be once people keep piling on with this bullshit. Yeah, it's sad. And honestly, the fact of all of this is why I have been why I'm doing this this week of streams. Yes, I do want to get back into streaming. Yes, I have been inactive for about a year. Yes, I want to get back to a point where I'm doing 2 or 3 streams, maybe 4 streams a week, maybe 5. But, seeing the American election happen, seeing the misinformation and bullshit from the Heritage Foundation and its very many fronts and allies, and seeing the potential for threat to life and limb of pretty much every trans person in the United States, what choice do I have? I've got to stand up for my homies. I've got to raise funds for Trans Lifeline. I've got to do my best. So that's what I'm doing. I don't have money myself, and no need to thank me. It's just something I feel obliged to do. But yeah, can't just let people go through this without at least making some effort. I know that no amount of effort. Thank you. Thank you for the dono, whoever that was. But yeah, it's not about me. It's got to be about Yeah, it, like yeah, my situation's fucked. I'm broke. I'm best part of $50,000 in debt. Push comes to shove. Not that I'm actually in a position to pay any of it back, so no one's chasing me for it particularly hard right now. But I mean, the point is that trans people in the United States are literally at the risk of their lives. Even in so-called sanctuary states, there's going to be some bigots who are going to feel emboldened by all this Heritage Foundation bullshit to go out and just straight up murder some trans people, and that can't stand. We have to be better than that. We have to prevent that shit, and that's why I'm doing this, is to do what I can to mitigate the harm. Again, it's not about me and my principles. It's about whether we can survive what's coming. And I say we because where America goes, Australia follows. And when, likewise with the UK, like we follow both of those nations quite closely in our political and social trends. They effectively provide permission for the worst of politicians' desires and instincts to come to the fore. Because, if people challenge them on some terrible policy ideas, they'll just say, well, the US is doing it, the UK is doing it. This is just Western civilization as usual, right? To which I say, fuck Western civilization. Anyway, back to the video.
All of these laws have led a lot of people to claim what is currently going on as a trans genocide. I personally might not be on that level quite yet, but I definitely do think that this is a systematic measure to get rid of trans people from existing in public space. But this is just a legal framework. What about the cultural impact? Like I said, this can create an environment of fear among private individuals to try to enforce what they think is the law, even though it might not actually be it. If transphobia becomes entrenched enough in a culture, you can change society quite significantly without having to actually change any laws. And laws are being changed, so you can only imagine what big impact that has on cultural perceptions of trans people. When conservatives pass laws that are outright transphobic, that lends credibility and legitimacy to being transphobic generally. It's not a fringe idea anymore. It becomes the law, or at least debated in law. The trans question becomes a legitimate discussion, rather than a thinly veiled attempt at arguing away the rights of another human being.
But there is a spectrum here of irrationality and insanity, let's call it what it is. And so if a man is convinced that he really is a woman, like in some of those viral videos we've all seen of the big burly man screaming in the bodega, my name is ma'am, my name is ma'am, not only is it the right of society to take some action here to restore order.
And you are saying that the government and the people that run it should be an arbiter of truth and then should involuntarily commit and basically lock people up who don't meet their perception of the truth.
And what ends up happening is increased cultural transphobia makes it so that more people want to legislate against trans people, which then feeds into more cultural transphobia, and the cycle just gets worse and worse and worse. And we can see this right now in modern day discussions around transness generally, with conservatives arguing that trans people, or queer people generally occasionally, are groomers and pedophiles. When I started this video, I kind of wanted to have this whole segment where I sort of dug into how this outrage machine started and what we can learn from that, but I just can't do that. Partly because it's pretty overwhelming, but also because it probably wouldn't do any makes it so that more people want to legislate against trans people, which then feeds